Welcome to Onsite with TED. I'm TED. This podcast was originally an internal training tool designed to create a better understanding of today's industry as it constantly evolves. We appreciate you watching. Please remember to like, subscribe, and share.
I'll defy the night. I thought I knew what was right. Every time I tried to justify. What was it you did wrong? Stare at me and wonder what it is you've done wrong. I'll build you up to tear you down, and I'll do it again.
This is P&A with John Hatterberg, Vesh Ranka, and Cudd Well Control. Ryan Hayes, I'm Tony Deere. Once again, please direct your questions through the chat so Manny can direct them at us. All right, let's go.
Yeah, so thank you for inviting me today.
Happy to have you.
So there's 3.6 million wells in the United States drilled since 1859. And we're only using 600,000 of those. So 3 million have been P&A'd, and P&A'd with like old technology. Back in the 1800s, they used just to walk away, and these wells are getting older and older. And then we're having all these problems, and we get a lot of business out of old wells, P&A wells. We have to go in and re-P&A them, P&A them first time correctly. So,
Or they weren't even P&A'd at all.
they weren't even P&A'd at all. Yeah. They're like one of them was in the middle of a subdivision, not P&A'd, abandoned in 1910. I think it had a mattress in it, that.
Buddy of mine was he's P&A'ing some wells up in Wyoming, and they went in and get out everything that was in there to begin with, right? They're fairly shallow, but they were pulling out the old derrick. They had the old wooden derrick.
Yeah. The wood.
They actually pulled the plate of it out.
Yeah. And old wood parts. And
Yeah, they're just random crap they just threw down there, right?
Yeah, I think that's what the scary end of the P&A is, right? When we look at this, we're not talking about something that we're developing today. We don't have the casing programs. We don't have everything with it. We're looking at something that has been forgotten by history, right? I did a P&A in West Virginia, and we went in and we started pulling and yanking on this, what we thought was tubing, but all of a sudden you've got no tongs that fit, nothing comes in, you're trying to break this, and it's unknown dimension pipe, and come to find out that they'd made their own homemade packer downhole with it. And so dealing with this and seeing this, what kind of well control, what kind of issues do you think, John, when we see something like this, what can we get into that maybe we can't get out of, right? Because I think most of the time we think, hey, it's from the 20s.
yeah,
But
it should all be the same.
yeah.
Well, we've seen wells drilled in the 40s, and they've been P&A'd, and then somebody comes by later that turned the well, unbeknownst to anybody, into like a water well, and there's like a water pump in the well. It's ridiculous. Some of the things that have gone on, and then a lot of times we'll get into a well and we'll have records, but the records are all wrong. Like you're P&A'ing a well, you're making an immediate expense, and there's no reward, right? So, and it's 1950, and the regulations aren't there. You're just gonna do it as quick and expedient as possible using the technology of the day. And they did that a lot, and there weren't regulations available there to say, hey, you need to keep these records and these records and these records. So a lot of times they're not there. They're either on paper, maybe the paper's crumbled to dust. We have to deal with all that.
So when you guys have went out on a lot of these different jobs, and you're trying to pre-job it, right? You're trying to plan that. What is that? What is that go-to for you? What is that? Is it that getting eyes on the situation, looking at the location, figuring the logistics, or is it more kind of rush in? Of course,
no, there's a lot of pre-plan that goes on. We always send somebody out like for the critical wells, and even the regular P&As. Like, let me go back to like a critical well is a well that you might have to go in and hot tap or do a freeze job or like go in and like rehead the well or something like that, that would fall more toward the well control side of things. If you have a dilute system on the well,
Mhm.
it's going to be a well control job, and then everything else is like maybe like a normal P&A job. I don't know if there is ever a normal P&A job, but that would be like a normal type job. But for any job, we'll go out there and we need to look at the well, see what's the surrounding area. Is there like a landowner nearby? Is there like a road that we're going to block? Like, do we need to build extra roads? Do we need to clear out brush or anything? Do we like what's the condition of the well? Like if we can't even see the well and it's like 20 foot down, we gotta do a lot of digging. Or is there a cellar there? We gotta break that up and move that out of the way. There's a lot of pre-planning. And then when we go work for a customer, they have to go to their bosses and say, we think that the P&A is going to cost this much. So we need to get as accurate or precise as possible as we can with our AFEs for them. And I know a lot of times you get into something and you find out like, hey, this is totally different from what we thought. But we need to build all those contingencies into the planning that goes on. So there's maybe like 30 or 40% of the brain power goes in a job is like involved in like, visiting a well site and pre-planning.
So you're basing this off worst case scenario by surrounding information, right?
Yes. Yeah.
I mean, what kind of funds? Yeah, everything takes fundage, right?
Mhm.
So where's those funds come from to make something like this happen? We hear across all the news, we got to stop this, we got to
Mhm.
do this, but where's that money coming from?
So some of the money is coming from, there's like 4 billion out there right now coming
4
from,
billion?
yeah, from the federal government to plug and abandoned orphan wells. So you remember I said there's 3 million wells in the US that are plugged that we know of, right? There's 120,000 orphan wells that are documented. Because I first heard the number, I was like 120,000. That's it. Like, well, no, that's only the ones that are documented. So there's also wells out there that just nothing. Like nobody has any
The
records on
zombie
it.
wells, those ghost wells
Yeah.
that come popping
Yeah.
up on us, right? Yeah.
So there's the federal government, and then your local state governments have money available, and then depending on the state, there's different regulatory rules about who needs to pay to P&A a well. Like, so if company A sells it to company B, and then company B goes out of business, in some states company A has to pay for the P&A. And I think in Texas, company A isn't responsible anymore. It falls on the state, but I might be wrong. Maybe Bavesh or Colin can correct me on that. But yeah, so these companies have a P&A budget. Imagine, going to your boss and say, hey, I want $1 million for P&A wells and like $500,000 for drilling. I'm just throwing numbers out, but
Right.
like I want half that much money to drill the wells. They're going to be like, well, how much money does P&A get us? Nothing. It's very difficult to get to get energy and involvement in doing P&A work.
Well, I think the unique side and angle I've been seeing a lot too, though, with when we start talking about this P&A, right? This methane release, this prevention. I think they're marketing almost to the environmental side, just
Mhm.
like we're putting a windmill in everybody's backyard or a solar panel on every roof.
Mhm.
So when we start looking at it, I think they're looking at it also from that idea of an ESG score, right?
Mhm.
So when we look at those ESG scores, if I plug so many of these wells and I stop that, I think there's that potential for that company now to lower their ESG scores, which then allows more fundage for
Mhm.
other things, right? But I find this whole monster really unique because a lot of us that came up in this P&A was an end of the life, end of the thing, or like you said, critical emergency, right?
Mhm.
So the unique end to that is what does it take? And I think one of the biggest misnomers is it's an easy job, right?
Yes. Yeah. $4 billion that are available. They want to turnkey the project. And a lot of times it's very difficult to turnkey like a big P&A job. Maybe something cookie cutter that maybe something drilled in P&A after the 1980s would be a lot easier. But anything drilled before like the 1980s with that Class A cement and the well and all that corrosion and time and unknown pressures, you may have a frac program going on right next door. You might have a bunch of pressure blow packer that you don't know is there. That could be happening. So things can change. And, there's all these, tabs that go on this money that come from the federal government. So that needs to be addressed, I think. Because
Sorry, go ahead.
go ahead.
No, usually when it comes to government, there's, rules, there's regulations, there's things tied to it. Like you have to have this to be able to get this type deal, right? Hoops to jump through. Why is it turnkey? Why do they prefer the turnkey?
Because they're large. They have to keep track of this money, and they don't want unforeseen consequences. They're looking at volume, quantity, right? They want to P&A a lot of wells for as low as possible, and anything extra they don't want to have to pay for. So
that whole cookie cutter analogy getting in place then.
So
every well's exactly the
Yeah.
same. Every well. So the same instance we run in on the other side on the drilling, where everybody wants to go cookie cutter and every well's the same.
Mhm.
They're trying to say the same thing with P&A now,
Accuracy by volume.
right?
Yeah.
So I think what'll happen is that the government money will go in. They'll P&A a lot of the easy to do wells, where there's not a lot of expectations of unforeseen consequences. And then, I'm not sure what percentage of that, of the 120,000 known wells will be, but then, there'll be wells that are left over that nobody wants to turnkey.
Well,
P&A.
where are you fitting in on, say, the contingency or maybe the more critical wells, right? Not necessarily the orphan wells, but something happens or we've got a P&A where things have gone south. Like, how are we fitting into that?
So on the well control side, we come in with our knowledge, our expertise. We can bring a hot tap equipment in. Like if you have some pipe or something in the we can go in and hot tap it and see what the pressure is. Like if a valve's frozen shut, we can go and gate valve drill. If we need to rehead a well, we can go in and freeze it and then rehead it. We also have all the equipment to do the reheading. We rent that, and all the expertise to come in and project manage these bigger wells. We have like most well control companies have a lot of experience people, and they can bring that to bear for doing P&As.
Well, I think personally, after all these years of being around, of course, the training side and then the industry side, what I find unique is a lot of times we put, and this is no way in an intellect level, but the least educated persons are a lot of times doing the P&As as well. Many people in these groups don't have well control training.
Mm-hmm.
They don't have experience with pressure. They're move pipe in, move pipe out, right? And
Just like workover. Yeah.
Right. And they think that's that same thing. And all of a sudden,
Sometimes.
yeah.
Well, like they used to do, like you said earlier, whatever was available at the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I was doing a case study on a well they P&A'd in the 40s, and they used 2 barrels of mercury, 56 pounds a gallon, but it still flows. Like, it'll kill it. Right?
Wow.
But like, could you imagine the repercussions of that today with all the regulations?
Yeah, well, or even norm, right? Where you're tripping out
nobody
spacing and pipe.
Oh, that's a big issue now. Like, going back to like how we pre-plan, a lot of it is going in and checking for norm.
What you got, Manny?
So we got a question from the chat. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Robert Rooney wants to know, are P&A services part of an energy service company or are they standalone companies?
Well, and that's a great question, Bob. It kind of is a unique monster we're dealing with right now. Used to be it was just all service companies, but we look now and we're starting to see companies buy that
Their
and
own
bring it
P&A
in. Yeah.
group,
And they're going out and they're spending big money buying that standalone
Yeah.
and then bringing them internal.
Cradle to grave.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so this is a unique model that we hadn't seen in the industry until just recently, that they're starting to bring in their own service companies. So yeah, I think that's a really cool
Mm-hmm.
thing to see that, especially these companies that deal legacy, right? The diversifieds and some of those companies that are really looking now as part of their structure is P&A. And how do we handle it and where do we go with it? And they found that truly just bringing it internally. Yeah. We always talk about how everything goes around in a circle. everything was spun out for so long, and now we see them being brought back in. But of course, I think a lot of the company's concerns is then liability, right?
Mhm.
So, I mean, what is that liability? I mean, is a way to buffer it? Is there something out there that can buffer that possibly AFE or money loss that comes in when we get into a bigger P&A?
And a
So,
second,
so the liability
second
is,
part to that question
Oh.
is, with the liability, there's a lot of companies that are self-insured,
Mhm.
right? So how does that affect them as well?
So the liability different. There's no nationwide regulatory liability rule in the U.S. It's by the state.
Ah,
Yeah.
okay.
So I think, and maybe Colin or Bhavesh can jump on, but I think in Texas that it's the last company that owned the well is responsible.
So, but let's just say we take ownership.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're looking at P&As and we're going, oh, well, this is my budget. This is it. What's there for that company to, when they get into a mess? I mean, other than calling you guys, I mean, these companies are having to look at legacy now as this major headache.
Yes.
What is their insurance for that? What is that end that can protect them? Is there anything out there? Yeah.
I'm not sure if there's insurance, but that we're really tied into our insurance partner Amwins, and I will ask them and let you know. But that's a great question. I'll come back to you.
Because that's one of those unique sides. Yeah, we talk about on the drilling stuck pipe and that kind of stuff. But is there something in that same boat when I'm drilling in and
DNA well,
boom,
Yeah. That question actually came up the other day, and we have these meetings with our insurance alliance partner, and somebody asked that, and there isn't anything that comes to mind. There might be something out there, but there's nothing that immediately comes to mind. But they're looking into that. This is such a big issue that they're even looking into creating some type of insurance for old P&A well.
Really?
Yeah.
It's interesting because you think about it, it's going to cost $20,000, and all of a sudden that trap pressure underneath and that flow to surface.
We got a question. What do you got, Manny?
Bhavesh has something to say.
Oh.
Bhavesh, go ahead.
Can you guys hear me? I tried speaking earlier.
Hey,
Freaking Ryan wouldn't stop.
He's good at that.
I'm known for that, Bhavesh. Yes.
Right. I'll go back to the question that Bob had asked first, right? About energy service companies or who is doing this. The best way to answer that question for me is why is a well control company in the business of doing P&A? What does P&A has to do with well control company? When I first pitched this idea to my boss, it was like I was crazy. Like, we are in the well control business? Why do we want to do P&A? But as John alluded to before, we are not after the run of the mill P&A. There are regular P&As, which there are service companies, workover companies that do it way better than we would, and in a more cost effective way. What we are looking after is critical P&A, where you have either wells that were already plugged. There is no access to the well. You cannot get into it. There is just a pipe sticking in ground, and sometimes there might just be a hole in the ground. And what we offer unique is us having an umbrella of service lines under our umbrella helps us provide a variety of services, whether it be from the initial assessment on how to get to the well, to doing the engineering and planning, budgeting, to rigging up and doing the P&A, to doing the cementing design, which is a big part of it. A lot of the wells, the critical wells that we have been doing or dealing with are wells that were already plugged and now they are leaking. They have pressure on it.
Yeah, with the old Class A cement.
Yeah.
Exactly. So we design cement slurries with additives where instead of the shrinking of the cement, the additives actually expand over time.
Mm-hmm.
And which helps a lot.
I don't know if I'm going to get us in trouble here or not, but are you able to talk about that one a couple of years ago? That you know the one I'm talking about?
Several of them. You might want to text me about that. We've done a few of these where there was one that we did in Tulsa where we go rig up and the paperwork on these is non-existent or incorrect at the most, usually. So we rig up, we have this design where we're like, okay, hey, we're gonna rig up coil on it. We're gonna go, try to P&A this from bottom up. We find a 2 3/8 piece of tubing sticking out, which is nowhere in the wellbore diagram or any of the paperwork. So we're like, okay, well, we'll pivot, we'll rig up a BOP on it and try to go inside it. Well, while we're trying to rig up a small BOP on it, the tubing starts moving. Come to find out, like this well was plugged in the 40s, and when there was a shortage of steel, the casing was pulled out of the well, and all that was left was a hole in the ground. So that's what we did. We ended up with going with coil and trying to plug it from bottom up like that, but there was no pipe in the hole. There was just a hole in the ground. I don't know, Tony, if that's the one you were referring to, or
So
I just texted you the one that I was going to ask about.
oh, gotcha.
I literally just hit.
That's a challenging one. We did this. This is not on the P&A side of things, but this is an old producing well, and this is what we are worried about, and why we are involved with this program. Is this well that was drilled, shut in, nothing happening on this, had about 300 psi on it, nothing. Early in the morning, one of the neighbors hears a loud explosion, and all they find is surface casing, intermediate casing, production casing, and tubing ejected out of the hole overnight. Just don't know what happened. That's on a newer well. Imagine what happens when you have wells that are not plugged properly. If there is a frac head, if there are contaminations or pressure releases, what happens then? And this is the reason why companies, whether they have the funding or not, they have this liability hanging, that they want to do it right. And from an ESG perspective, it's the right thing to do as well.
And that well was actually being flowed to
Yes.
P&A, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So thankfully it happened before the P&A crew got there.
Yeah, most of the P&As that we have done have been like, you go in there, either there are incorrect records, you cannot get onto it, there are no wellheads, it's just a pipe in the ground. And that's the challenge for us, is how do we gain access to it? That's why I said the critical P&As is what we go after.
It's a big risk for these companies because they could have contaminated groundwater. They could have pressures from lower zones coming through their P&A well that's improperly P&A'd, or P&A'd back in the 40s, and could have pressure on other wells. We've seen blowouts on other wells.
is this just a US problem? Yeah.
It's international. So those numbers I gave you, 3.6 million wells drilled in the US. That's just the US. So it's happened. Like,
Are we starting to hear this now out of Europe and yeah.
And then like in Norway, they have problems with like seismic, like, wells will be cut in half because of faults. So how, you got to go in and P&A that, like with the relief well, or, cold tubing drilling, or some type of newfangled technology.
Do you guys find that we've got a certain state or a country that has this worse than anywhere else? I mean, this orphan well P&A issue, or is it just across the board?
It's across the board.
Nice. We got a question from the chat box.
Specifically from Blake. He wants to know if there's any government required training for P&A companies to have contracts or bids, be rewarded contracts or bids.
Maybe like ISO 9000 certified.
I mean, when we come from the state
Most of
level, I think you're going to probably hit that some sort of formal well control, but
formal well control.
Yeah.
What were you going to say, Bhavesh?
No, I don't think there is like as such any training requirement as such for P&A companies. It's on the onus is on the company to have the right crew.
So when we look at that, Bhavesh, and I kind of chime in here a little bit on it. Do you think that, a specific P&A training could assist these companies a little bit?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because I think the biggest issue I see going forward is when you hear billions of dollars that are available, you will get a lot of companies trying to get a piece of that money, and new companies start forming. They might try to take shortcuts and all that.
Mhm.
So having a robust program, whether it be training wise or an educational program, where people see the risk associated with it. Because going back to why a well-controlled company is involved with P&A, the number of well-controlled jobs that we do have changed, and the type of well-controlled jobs we do has changed over a period of time. When I first started doing this, we were doing more well-controlled jobs on the drilling side, and most of them were pressure control jobs. Nowadays, we do more jobs on the workover, completion, production, P&A wells, where they're having issues. And most of them are not even pressure control jobs. Most of them are blowouts to a varying degree of leaks. So when I tell the statistics to people, you can see the shock on their faces, like, hey, that many well-controlled incidents are happening, and not a lot of them are advertised, or not a lot of them are in the news. So going back to answer your question is, a little bit of training, a little bit of education will definitely be helpful for the industry, knowing what are the risks associated with it, what kind of events are happening.
At least a little bit of awareness, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, and I know for a lot of the instructors in the audience, what do you think would be you've been through the well control classes, you've been in that. When we hear that guy that we've got in class that's doing P&A, we get that one guy that's coming in, he's going to be doing those jobs. There's so many different factors that go into P&A. What do you think is that main topic we should be hitting with that group to make sure that they're getting that, understanding? Is it risk management? Is it risk awareness? Is it the mathematical end? Because
I would say the risk awareness and risk management.
Awareness. Yeah.
Risk awareness, risk management.
Yeah.
I think it's funny because when we talk to these guys and we do these workover classes, and we do P&A and everything, we get so many frat guys that they think that steel's perfect, right? The integrity, and they think everything's just like it's brand new. But the communication zones, and we start talking, but and that's where I'm with you guys on that. I think when we look at that training sector of it, we've got to get into talking their language, right? We got to hit them with the unexpected. As soon as you think it's dead, well, there's no such thing as dead. So I mean, that's of course an opinion piece there, but it's what you see in the field. And you guys see that the most. So when you guys, we talked pre-planning, we talked about that. Of course, with you guys and Cudd in general, you really have a lot of access and ability to different equipment that not every company has. Is there one, because we get this coil tubing versus snubbing war, and is there one tool that when you guys look at it, you say that's what I'm going to need on site?
Well, so this is a great lead in. There's a lot of issues with companies P&A well and using like a bunch of different companies. So you have like personality differences, different ways that they bill, different ways that they deal with the environment or safety. And it's good to have that synergy and having lots of different companies that have one point of contact for the company manager or the project manager on location to talk to run everything. And like if you use a company like a larger service company, they can bring in the the cementing, the cold tubing, the hot taps, the reheads. If they could bring in like a plethora of different services that you need, it's just going to make things a lot easier on them. There's also some cost savings involved with like using the same company over and over and over again for the different services.
Manny, you raised your hand. We got a question.
Actually, we got a input from David Kennedy. I'm sorry to keep you waiting, David. If you have something to say, go ahead. Now's your time to shine.
I just wanted to let you all know I shared a video where the West Virginia DEP found an old orphaned well that had been drilled like the turn of the century, then plugged about 1949 inside an apartment building in Wheeling. And it was leaking crude up to the ground. They had to actually design a rig with a 10-foot drill pipe, and they put their pumps and mud system outside. I shared that video in the chat, but that's a huge problem here in the Northeast on old shallow wells that were drilled like back in the late 1800s, early 1900s.
Yeah.
And they don't even have a record of where most of them are. They find them inside shopping malls, apartment buildings. That's a neat little video I shared. But I found out something recently too, that when the pandemic hit, the West Virginia DEP no longer requires plugging companies, P&A rigs, to even have a well control certification here anymore. But I'm kind of working on that side of it too, because there's a ton of, there's like 8 rigs working right here just in the county I live in, plugging wells ahead of longwall miners, where the mining industry is working so hard.
That Northeast, David, you're exactly right. It is, it's the cradle of oil and gas, the original, and if we look from 1859, up through, I mean, it's incredible how many holes were popped in the ground. And, before there was records, anything was put in place. And then even post, coming from there, David was talking about the one that was found in Wheeling. It's actually a common occurrence to find these wells in basements in different places. With the company I was previously working for, we actually had one in the basement of what was a factory. Well, in 1890, it was a factory, but they turned it into housing. And all of a sudden, they started smelling gas. They started smelling a leak, right? And of course, the unique side behind it is it goes unnoticed because it's like methane. It's not what they're used from a pipeline. And luckily they didn't have an explosion, but you'll see that up there a lot of times. And, outside of Connellsville, Pennsylvania, they built a house over top of an old P&A well, and it leaked and it blew up. It blew up, the house.
Was there anybody inside of it?
Yeah, actually. No, I mean, that's a unique side to being in an area that you've got 170 years, of,
Drilling.
Well,
And it has pressure on it.
Ground,
And
right?
maybe we need well control training.
Well,
We got
the plugging standards have changed since these wells were plugged back in the 40s and 50s with old wooden plugs and gunk plugs and just anything imaginable. I actually worked on a P&A rig once for a couple of years, and the prog when we went out to plug this well said it had a 50-foot aluminum plug, and I sat down on that plug to drill it, went out to the shell shaker, and it was Quaker State oil cans coming out of the hole.
Just to piggyback on what you said, in Texas, even it wasn't mandated that cement be put in wells for P&As until 1934, and then plugs and packers were mandated till 1957. There's a lot of wells drilled before those years.
Manny, you said we got a question.
Yes, Mike Howard has his hand up and has something to say. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, thanks, guys, for taking my question. With all the federal funds that are coming in and everything, are there federal regulations that are coming out on all of how these wells should be P&A'd, or is every P&A still part of state regulation, regulatory bodies? How does that work?
So talked to Colin before coming, and I asked about that, and he told me that a lot of the money comes with tax, saying like you need to turnkey these wells, and there are a lot of regulations, and it's not like here's just a pile of money, go fix this well. It's like I need to hold things. The government comes at it from a point of view. I need to hold things back and reduce costs, because I want to P&A a large quantity of wells instead of do quality. And then also they're not real. The rules are in place from the federal government. They're not real resilient. Like if something goes in the well and changes, they're not very quick to follow up and say, okay, here's extra money because you drilled into this well, you hot tapped in this well, and there's actually pressure there where we weren't thinking, and it's going to cost another $100,000 P a well. They don't do that.
Well, yeah, I guess,
Hang on. So it's kind of like when you write a grant or whatever, right? So you're asking the government for the money to do it, and you give them you present them your plan, and they either accept it or they don't, and that's everything you get.
And they don't want any deviations from the plan.
Okay.
Yeah.
well, yeah, and I think that's what I've got the biggest, issue on. Don't really have regulations. What we have is economic entitlement when it comes to this, right? So it's more about the dollars, the fundage, and then how they want to spend it than it is understanding that the difference is. So, I mean, how do we, and I know none of us get that call, but how do we get these guys to understand that this isn't, a recyclable trash can that we can just go and close the lid on? Yeah. And I think that's the biggest thing we look at, what Mike's asking about, that regs, that's what I feel like. I feel like the federal government's telling us that, oh, well, it's easy to P&A a well. Just
go do it.
Yeah, just
here's money, go do it.
do it. And
It's a hole in the ground. It's not that hard.
Yeah.
Now it's 100-year-old hell in the ground.
Yeah.
That's the problem, right? Yeah. So as we look at that, what is that? What is that answer? And we know it's not from the states, and then is the BLM, is Bessie, is anybody making this happen for the future though? Are we seeing any type of regulations or anything that come into play, or where they have to bond out money so that the P&A is guaranteed later on? Is there anything like that going on?
We're using some of the regulations are still from the 1980s. I went to a API conference to talk about P&As, and we were asking some of the people in the audience were asking, can we use resin instead of cement? Yeah, I like to, but it's so slow to change the rules.
No, into the idea, you got to pull the steel, you got to have so much footage of it, you got to do all that. Yeah.
So, because the rules now is you have to have so much footage of cement. Well, can we use less? Can we require less if we use resin? And it's just, it's very stuck in the mire. And I think, there's going to be, we're going to have to see a lot of these older wells have big problems before maybe it'd be nice to get ahead of it, but we'll have to see the older wells have problems before we get to change the rules.
Right. But how are they proving that even if you have X amount of feet of cement, right?
Yeah.
We know that it lasts for so long, and then it's going to start to degrade. And your newer cement, they say that it doesn't, but how do we know, or how are we proving that it's actually holding, right? And there's nobody there continuously monitoring what's going on.
Yeah. Well, so it may be like this new, cement, like some other things in life, like, people rush things out, and like we find out like, hey, maybe we need to change some things. But I think the chemical makeup that's for cement, like now with the double expanding cement, I think that's working out pretty well so far. We could always find out, 100 years from now that
I'm not going to find out 100 years.
Yeah. Or so our great.
I'm just hoping to make it another 15.
But I mean, like the guys in the 50s thought, okay, Class A cement, I'm going to pump that and go home, but we're having to go back and fix these wells.
Well, I mean, you can't blame the guy in 1879 who said, well, if I take a pine tree and I shove it in a hole, we're good, right?
Yeah.
And I think that we're kind of in that same ball game if we don't change those designs. You know, so the more we look at that, the more the regulations come into play, you know, and that is this going to be something that us as an industry needs to take a hold of. And you know,
Yeah,
as we do with
absolutely.
API, right? You know, we make small steps and it's over and over and over again. But do we have to come out here and say, hey, you know, to prevent this to being done again, you know, are we gonna
It may be a political solution instead of an industry solution, I'm thinking.
really?
Yeah. It's change, you know, we could scream like all day long, like we want to change or, you know, improve this rule, or we don't, you know, this rule isn't, you know, this is from 1986. We don't need this rule anymore, but it needs to come from the political arena, I'm thinking.
Question, Manny? Oh, sorry, my bad.
Everybody's quiet today.
Yeah.
That chat box isn't lighting up. I thought I
Well, actually, they have a lot to say, but they're not necessarily questions for y'all. So
behind the scenes conversation.
no.
What do they
They
say?
are talking about the related topic,
Yeah.
and they are mentioning different things. There is a question that I did miss earlier, and I'm sorry, Scotty, for missing it. The question was, what is the most common P&A failure that requires some type of intervention? Cement? Question mark.
Probably cement. Wouldn't you say, Bhavesh? Like just the Class A cement from, when do they pump cement, Class A cement up to like 1990? Like all those wells, like of the 3 million wells, probably like a large percentage of them.
Oh, I'd say there's more than
Just
that,
the-
man.
the micro channeling,
we
the
were doing
pressure.
that clear up into the, you know,
In Ohio, you
Yeah.
in West Virginia, you still pump the
Yeah.
the regs are Class A still.
yeah. I mean, they were
That's another example of like the regulations not keeping up with technology.
they were
There's-
using latex paint to set plugs. I mean, that's
Mhm.
pulling it right off the shelves of Big Lots. I mean,
Yeah.
that's what they'd come out with. Yeah. And it's unique, and that's still happening. Yeah, that's not oh well, that's what we did in the past. That's what we do as a standard. And I think that's a unique side. But
Mhm.
the only regs we've got, if we start looking at DOT and we go back in from the federal government, the guidance, they were built in 1983. You know, I mean, wells have changed a lot, and you know, the wells that they were P&A in back then were a lot different than the wells we're P&A today. So
Mhm.
yeah, what is that conversation? I think, John, you hit it, and Bhavesh, you guys, with that total package, I think you have to start thinking beyond, well, this is going to be an easy job, right? I mean,
do you think with the new generation of oil field, like to me, you say it was made in 1983. I'm cool with that. I was alive then. You know, I don't want to admit that's old, man. You know what I mean? So do you think with the newer generation of petroleum engineers that are coming out, the more they get this, they're like, man, that was made how long ago? You know, and do you think that that's going to help us start looking at it from a different perspective eventually?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think so. They're gonna, you know, yeah, like you say, like a 1983 well doesn't seem that old to me, but yeah, like somebody that was born in 2000. Yeah.
I vividly remember the Challenger exploding.
Yeah.
I watched it on TV.
Yeah,
Right?
exactly.
and that brings up a good point. We also look at the casing design. We look at the history, right?
Mhm.
And now we're talking mono strings. We're talking about, we're not building a well for the next 99 years. We're building
Building
a
it to
well.
save money.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
to drill faster, better.
exactly. Right. But now are we going to be looking at wells not in the time frame of 50 years from now needing a P&A, but 5, 10 communication issues? You know, the critical well that you guys are looking at sounds like that's what's really going to start popping, especially in places like West Texas, the Northeast, where we're starting to see these multi-well pads. Yeah.
Or you got a 1,200-foot shoe in an 18,000-foot well, right? Because we've learned how to skid by that or used managed pressure or find a way to drill under balance to make it past that point, knowing what's going to happen, right? I mean, you got a 1,200-foot shoe and one production string down to 18,000 feet.
And you might have survived drilling it, but then somebody comes by and does a frac program next to the well, and then you have problems. Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, I think that's that question. What does the future hold? Yeah,
And pad drilling.
yeah,
You have all these wells right next to each other. You have a problem on one well, of all the wells on the pad, and it's channeling up pressure from down deep. You could have pressure in all your wells on a pad,
Yeah.
And so it's there's a lot of these new technologies are great, but they come with unforeseen consequences.
Manny, you said we got a question?
Yes, David Kennedy has something he would like to add. Go ahead, David.
So P&A guys that I had in Odessa, just something I wanted to add, informed me like the town of Odessa and Midland towns are growing up around a field of oil wells. So there were a lot of good wells that they're plugging, and a lot of companies wanted a pressure control consultant on location at all times just for reliability, because they were still good wells, had good pressure on them, and they were having to plug them just because it was becoming a metropolitan region right around that field. And they wanted someone there just in case something did go wrong.
that's a lot like what you're doing there too. Yeah, it's P&A a good well. Yeah, because of
Urban sprawl.
urban sprawl,
Yeah.
or it's like where Dave lives, coal mining. They're coming through with the long wall, or they're going to come through. And when you guys look at this at Cudd, are you guys thinking about that advanced planning?
Oh, that's a big issue with advanced planning. Going in there, talking to the landowner. Do you need to build a road? Is there somebody's house nearby? It increases the landowner's worry if they have all this equipment near their house. If it's out like on the back part of their property, their worry goes down. But it's a huge thing, and sometimes we're only allowed to work like 8 hours a day. We can't work 24 hours a day. It is a lot of the landowner's worry is built into that. And
Yeah, it's just putting eyes on it we're not used to, right?
Yes, yeah. And no company wants to send in a mom and pop. Nothing wrong with mom and pops, but nobody wants to send in a mom and pop and on a critical well, and there's houses nearby and something go wrong. You want the best companies to go in and do that. The critical wells.
We look at it, and it wasn't even a well; it was a pipeline in Colorado. Of course, the fracking debate got nixed and everything because we blew up a house. That was the thing, and it was an abandoned pipeline. The house was built over. The owners knew it.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, as we look at that, and that's a great point, David. That urban sprawl. What is that zombie well or that ghost well? What happens when this company doesn't plug it right?
We went into, there was a company up in the north, and they had all these different wells, and they had data on like nearby roads, schools, houses, pipelines. We took that data, that like all the well locations, and we ranked all the wells. Like we gave them different rankings based on like, if it was a school or business or, whatever. And we gave them like a number value. So we say, these are the worst wells that you need to look at. And then we took their wellhead data, like how bad their corrosion was, unexpected pressures, and their valve functionality on their wells. And we combined that data and we said, okay, these are like your top 10 worst wells that, it's a bad well near a school. It's going to be at the worst part of the list.
So you guys are actually doing
preventative type.
Yeah.
things.
So, wellhead audits and that kind of stuff to mark these out, right?
Mm-hmm.
So question, back in the day, like there was land hands, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they started drilling deviated to change where it would come out of the, like there was a dude up on a hill with a pair of binoculars trying to figure out what depth by how many joints pipe came out of the hole, nobody was lying or telling the truth. Everybody's lying on their paperwork, right? And like you go to tag something and you find it 300 feet early or 700 feet later.
Yeah.
So if we're looking at all of this and you're basing it off of that information that was made back then, and none of it's accurate. So is everybody has a trend. Everybody does, like, we're creatures of habits, right?
Mhm.
So if you can know what that specific company was there, can you find a trend in that old, like, I'm going to lie by, let's say 800 feet, or I'm going to lie by X amount of pressure, right? So that it was always there, and somebody that was in that company would know, okay, take 300 off of this, right? Is there a trend like that into this old information?
That a lot of that's lost. Like that's why the records are so bad. Like before like 1990s, it's just like, like you say, they're all the lying, and like you'll have like really good records on a well.
None of it's true.
None of it's true.
Yeah.
So we deal with that all the time in P&A.
Well, I was sickling in a hole one time. I wasn't supposed to see anything for 1,300 feet, and all of a sudden I stacked out on a packer. Just
Yeah.
but that's over there now. So
That's why it's so hard to do a proper pricing or cost assessment on these wells, because all the unknowns and the inaccurate information.
Right.
Well,
I'm not going to say company names because, like, that's just not right. But let's say brand X, right?
Mhm.
So if this field was brand X's, and that land hand was that guy, like, he has a trend somewhere, somehow. How do you figure that out though, without going in?
Probably just like maybe the first way you do it, like, hey, everything's screwed up. Probably on the next well, everything's going to be lied about, and all the nearby wells. It's something you would learn as you go, unless you had like an old hands like, hey, Tony just lied about everything. So anywhere you see Tony's name on it, just throw it out the window.
Ask my wife; she tell you I lied all the time.
Well, the unique end of that though is technology too, right?
Mhm.
We think that technology solves the problem, but I mean, we watch Windows become obsolete, Windows 7, now Windows 10. But what happens to well log? And all of a sudden they go out of business. What happens to that data, to give us that good information?
Mhm.
Yeah, sometimes the old paper and the carbon copy work really well, but now what are we going to look at when, technology changes? I watched at a company I was at where they went from microfiche, you went from paper data, and then they spent $1 million and they put everything on microfiche. And nobody knew what microfiche was when
Nobody knew how to use it. Yeah.
And
all of a
something you look
sudden-
at when you do genealogy.
Yeah. But the problem with it is they didn't think they had well records. They were throwing this stuff out. And all of a sudden somebody's like, hey, no, this is the well record, right?
Well, I'll go on like well control jobs like overseas or even in the US, and we'll go on the job and they're like, hey, this is the records. This is what we think it is. And we'll be like halfway through the job. And it's like, oh, no, the casing, the liner in the well's like really this big, and then we think the pressure is like double what we thought it was, because all this stuff is like in some back room somewhere.
Well, formation pressure is always the initial spud pressure, right?
Yeah,
I mean,
always, yeah.
Every time. Works 60% of the time, 100% of the time.
but I mean, that's that, but we go by that. We live in that world, especially in the workover. And we hear this all the time. Well, that formation pressure is 5750. Well, yeah, maybe in 1927 it was, but today it's 200 pounds.
Yeah.
And then
or it could be
that's exactly it, right?
Or fracking next door,
Or fracking right next door.
Some underground river that, like, who knew this came through? Like, we're getting all this water,
and that becomes a scary end if I went back to the field, right? If I went back into P&A and I think about the way we always did it, right? And knowing the well control aspect, we look at it today. What happens when that well is communicated that they fracked and is communicating to zones, and all of a sudden I part that casing, I get ready to pull that steel, and I'm not pulling it anymore. It's coming on its own, right? What is that? What is that contingency for a normal workover crew? They got no way to stop this, right?
Yeah.
They're pipe light with the heaviest thing in the well that they've got and nothing to hold them down.
Exactly. Yeah, better have the well control company on.
Yeah.
But a way to prevent it is to to have some type of SIMOPS. I know, like in around Midland, there's like a consortium set up for companies to share. Hey, I'm going to be fracking in this area. If you're drilling there, maybe you need to, if you have a drilling program, maybe you need to delay it a month while I frack or something like that.
But now I love it for the drilling end, but back to the workover side, right?
Yeah,
Is anybody even talking? And Is Jimmy and Joe out here and the dog, as they go out here to get ready to
Mm-hmm.
PNA this well, do they have any, anything other than a piece of paper saying this is what I want done?
Just like in certain areas that they have consortium set up to share information, and some areas nothing. And
Well, and
like Bhavesh was saying, a lot of our work for well control right now is work over P&A, production. It used to be more drilling, taking kicks and things like that.
so really, and back, as we talked, we got a lot of instructors on here that are listening, and I think, we go back to that hot point. This is where math doesn't answer the question, does it?
Mhm.
Yeah, numbers and actual are never the same, right?
Yeah. So it's more about talking about the risk management and having the conversation like we're doing today, right?
I do have a question. I got a buddy, he's a consultant, and, he called me a couple times, a couple days ago, and they're going to P&A this well. There wasn't anything there, so they're going to pull out. Now that's, don't get me wrong, it's a saltwater flow, but they were flowing all the way out, didn't even care. Tried to spot a mud cap, it didn't work. No secondary mechanical barrier. It was just a mud cap that didn't work. They go to plug this well off, and all they did is pop a cement plug, hold some pressure on it, right? But there was 700 psi on the backside when they did this,
Mhm.
right? So I mean, that well is still technically alive. Yeah.
Uh-huh.
How often do you see something like that, or how often do you have to go out and fix, because now they got to fix that well because they did the same thing 50 years ago,
yeah.
right?
Yeah, a lot of people trying to do things as quick as possible, or at least expensive, or their options are running out, so they go ahead and just do it however they can, and then we have to go back out and fix it for them. It involves like hot tapping or doing a freeze or going in a well and squeezing cement. There's a lot of that happens behind the scenes.
It's kind of scary that I don't know how to say this without sounding mean, but there's a lot of companies out there that'll attempt to do the job, but if anything goes wrong, they can't afford to fix it.
And then they won't put anything on the records. Okay, I don't have to worry about this. Maybe something will happen 4 years from now, or it's human nature, but it does happen quite a bit.
More just comments from the chat. For example, Ward says BLM rewrote their P&A regs in the early 90s, which requires the well to be perforated in vacious locations. And do you know what is behind the pipe prior to perforating?
Did you say vacious locations or various locations?
Well, I'm not sure if that's a word. I don't know what it means.
It's
or if
probably a
it's
North
typo.
Dakota word.
Okay.
There it is.
That's a great point, Ward. That's one of the scary ends. It was not County Kentucky doing a well, and we shot into it, and next thing I know, we've got a tower of fluid, flowing at us with nothing sitting on top of it because we thought we had cement plugs, right? Yeah.
Mhm.
So it is, you start looking at those, what is behind the steel, and all of a sudden you're wanting me to pull the steel. Why are you
Mhm.
wanting me to pull the steel? So,
If
Well, and then
you're
the
sitting-
other thing that the whole thought behind a lot of this is you're P&A in this well. There's nothing left in this well, so do you need well control equipment on the well is what a lot of people are thinking. So there may or may not be much for well control equipment on there, but you probably should have well control equipment on there, just like what Ryan's saying. You
Yeah.
perforate that well, you don't know what you're perforating into,
Mhm.
you could be
but,
perforating into something somebody fracked into.
and it goes back to it. It's a bad habit of workover. We look at workover two ways. One on new wells, and and then you get into this whole different monster. It doesn't matter if it's P&A or workover. They don't think they need to have the well control. They don't think they have to have the accumulator, the package, the wellhead, and that's kind of scary. They start classifying these well out, and legacy gets no respect.
Mhm.
Yeah. And I mean, I know you've been on a lot of wells, John, that it's 60 years old, and you shut the valve and all of a sudden, boom, we're at 8,000 pounds again.
But Vish has these two pictures he'll show people, and it's like, here's a wellhead and here's a wellhead. This one's all ate up and it's looking horrible. And this one looks like it's brand new. And he's like, how old do you think these wells are? And the brand new looking one is like 40 years old, and the one that's all ate up is like 5 years old.
Yeah.
So it's CO2, H2S that could screw up your well. The
Inland
different
waters,
huh?
inland waters.
Inland water, yeah, inland water.
Well,
like
you have
salt water.
power lines, right?
Yeah.
I mean, the conduciveness of that.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
so we start looking at it, it is, but it's all to the mind's eye, right? As we see it and as we look at it. So as we see P&A, I think that's the same problem. We've got that same monster.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
not a brand new well.
Yeah.
And yeah.
And even the ones that had high pressure and may have still been flowing, if it's 15, 20 years old, it gets no respect.
Mhm.
And so, I think that's the tough end for, the consumer is to say, what is that critical well? What is the standard?
That's something I say that all the time. Like, you can't be scared over it. You got to have a healthy respect for what she can do, but you can never be scared over it.
But you could prepare.
Yeah.
You
You can be prepared as much as possible according to the surrounding information, right?
Yeah, that's a lot. A lot of it is people that are P&A-ing wells, these companies, they need to check the surrounding wells.
Yeah.
See what's the pressure, what's happening with the pressure. And if you have a lot of strange pressure readings on all the wells around your well that you're going into P&A, that may be indicator that's a critical well, and you need to get deluge system and going in a hot tap. Make sure, maybe use a snubbing unit or whatever you need to do.
Yeah, I really think too, as we look at this, communication issue is going to be huge. I mean, from here on out, what we're doing, and because we're not running those, I think communication is going to be big, and making sure that conversation,
Mhm.
Yeah.
happens.
Well, we have the tendency to not communicate between people, right?
Mhm.
Manny, what do we got?
We got input from Ward. Ward, go ahead.
One other comment I was going to make is like the Railroad Commission there in Texas. For years and years and years, it used to be when we had junk in the well, we just set a plug over the top of all that junk, and that was our P&A. Railroad Commission has changed their view on that now. They're making you make an attempt to recover that fish out of that well. What's below every fish?
Pressure.
Pressure.
Yeah.
And so Railroad Commission has changed their attitude about how wells are being P&A'd. This has been several years ago, probably 3-4 years ago when they started this. So this is something new with Railroad Commission.
That's good though. That's really good that they're doing that. It's happening slowly, but it's like Mr. Ward said, it's the change is coming. Maybe not as fast as some people would like.
But when you look
This
at
has been requiring P&A for quite a while now.
Yeah.
But when you look at that, John, and from the Cudd standpoint, from the well-controlled professional standpoint, okay, we know the danger of going fishing. We know the danger of
Mhm.
cleaning out a well.
Mhm.
We know that, we're putting stuff into place. To be mandated to go in and clean something out and be in and out of that hole so many times and maybe not get the fish. Are we putting people in risk at the same time?
Yeah,
right?
we're out the casing,
Yeah.
people at risk. Yeah. All that needs to be taken in, to pre-planning and, get your company. Like, how many times can we run out of those casing? Do you think, we can even like go in and run logs and see how good a casing is with the, Kinley caliper logs and CBL use it logs, things like that. And give us a good idea. It's like, hey, the casing is not going to hold up too long, or it's pretty good casing. We can run in and out multiple times, or you probably shouldn't run a mill in there, or, whatever we need to do.
Are you seeing companies now take that prep?
Yes. Yeah. The ones that call us for critical well control do. On the other side, I'm not so sure. Did Colin ever join? No. Oh, well, on the other side, maybe somebody in the audience could let us know, but I would say
Probably not.
probably not.
Yeah, and that's a tough end of it, right? Yeah. When you have the tech, but we don't use it.
Yeah,
When
or
we
it's
have the
expensive.
knowledge,
Yeah.
or it's
We don't
expensive, right?
Yeah,
Yeah. So
we don't have the money there.
you always see that post
Mhm.
accident, right? Well, we could have done this or we could have done that. Yeah. So I think it's a unique world we live today in this P&A craze, right? And and who knows what 10 years from now is going to bring, what tech comes because of it, right? Yeah. And
Well, necessity is the mother of all invention.
that's right.
I'm hoping new
$4 billion.
technologies better
$4
regulations,
billion gets people
Yeah.
motivated.
more resilient. Like here's the federal government, here's some money, and then we'll be more resilient about it. Like instead of just throwing it all in some P&A company, be like, hey, we want you to turnkey this. Like I don't know how far that's going to go, but I think that's the way forward.
The unique side about it is I've always loved teaching and working with guys who've done P&A, right? Because they tell stories like you would not believe, right? That this one time, and and we get those, right? But you see always behind the eyes, they tell that great story, but the unique side behind it is the guys that have really done it for a long time. You can see them behind their eyes when they're telling it. There's almost a fear, right? They know,
Hilty.
they know,
fear.
knock on wood, I made it home, but they've seen so much that they couldn't even explain why this happened or why that happened. Yeah. So that's when I look at P&A, I think, where does this craze go? Because $4 billion is $4 billion, right? I mean, and that's going to be the mother of all invention, in my opinion. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we may only get 50 wells done for $4 billion, the way our political reigns work, but but where do we move forward? And I think you guys there with Cudd and what you're doing and putting that total package together is incredible. Because that that's going to be that stop where they know they're getting well controlled. They know they're going to get the service end of it. They know that when the job's done right. Right.
Exactly. Yeah.
You want to elaborate for me, buddy?
No, it's in the P&A world, if when you're going after, let's say we found an old orphan well in the Gulf of Mexico, and we get in there, we run our diagnostics, and we go through there and we find there's change and there's all kind of crap in there. Regulators aren't going to make you get that all out of the way. They're just going to make sure you've made an effort to try to do something, but they're not going to make you get it all the way out of the hole. They're just going to let you call calf rope after a while. But you have to be careful, because there's a lot of companies out there that will try to do P&As half-ass, and those are the ones that usually come back to the operator. The operators today that are plugging wells on a schedule, that's simple. We go in there and we do it the right way. But it's after you've sold a field to Bob's Oil Company back in 1980 and he's gone bankrupt. The next thing you know, Railroad Commission's calling you and saying, hey, big operator, you got a leaker over here. So, well, we don't own that anymore. We sold that back in 1983. And they go back through there and they go, yeah, but we've gone back through the chain of custody, big guy, and now you're responsible for it. And we probably get 10 or 12 of those a year. So unfortunately, that's what happens, and you got to fix them. So usually the regulator will work with you to a certain degree. Some of the smaller guys may have a little more difficulty than the big guys, but you have to be cognizant of which region, let's say, of the Texas Railroad Commission you're working in.
Hey, Todd, I was checking out the rules from the Texas Railroad Commission. Companies are liable for incorrect P&A records, but is that in practice? Do they ever come back and find it? Have you ever heard of them finding anybody for lying or trying to pull the wool over the Texas Railroad Commission's eye doing P&A?
I haven't ever heard of anybody going to jail or getting fined big time. When we pick up things that have been orphaned that come back to us, it's just kind of like, all right, great. We'll go back through the records and we'll say, okay, let's say if we drilled this, say, I'm using names out there. If we drilled this with Occidental, were they partners in this? And if they were, we can go, oh, great, now we can share the cost. So that, that's kind of like the only saving grace that we can get, is if we have another big operator that's in there that can help share the burden. We go through that all the time.
And Todd, if I can ask you a question here, and I think that's kind of picking at everybody's brain as well. How scary is this idea that we're going to see a change in the guard at the Texas Railroad Commission or some of these regulatory bodies into kind of like what we saw in Pennsylvania, where they handed over to the Susquehanna River Board to try to make the laws? I mean, we see a lot of comments, we see a lot of stuff being said. And if we would see a different type of administration in there, how bad is that going to affect us?
Well, that's why us big operators, we have lobbyists that live on K Street in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
You can't, you hear about the fox guard and the hen house, where you can't have unqualified, uneducated people in the oil and gas industry trying to make law or rules for us, because if that's the case, we're going to be in a 9-line bind. So, all these big oil companies, we spend millions and millions of dollars with people that are trying to protect our interests with the politicians at the state and at the federal level.
Have you seen this money coming from the federal government been put to good use, or is it just kind of sitting there? Like I've heard it's just kind of sitting there, not being used 100% for the P&A work.
Well, it's like for, let's say, Texas Railroad Commission, they get their annual budget, let's say it's $200 million to go address orphan wells every year. That doesn't mean anything else. That's just the orphan wells that come back to them. Well, they blow through that stuff in 4 or 5 months. It's done. When I was still in the well control business, we did all of the Railroad Commission's work, and they, by the time they get to you, to the bad wells, they've already run out of money, and it's hard to go in there, and they're wanting you to do work for nothing. And sometimes you just have to say, sorry, we're not going to address it, because that liability is too great for us. And, we're in the business to make money, not lose money.
Unless I misunderstood it, I'm not trying to be unfair, but it kind of sounds like that we're going to do as many of the easy wells as possible and leave the hard wells that actually need to be a P&A for later, so that we can show on our budget report quantity, not necessarily quality.
Yeah, let the next generation do it.
Yeah.
Well, it's not so much that. It's just, once, it doesn't matter if that, I'm just using that $200 million a year number. It doesn't matter if that's for one well or 500 wells. I think they go after the low hanging fruit first, the ones that are smaller, so they can get more bang for their buck. But if they have an issue with an orphan well offshore and where an old platform used to be, and now they can't find an owner going back, because it was Todd's Oil Company back in 1962, which there's no one to be found. There's no Todd, there's no Todd's kids, there's nobody to go back on, and it's leaking oil. Well, yeah, now they have no choice but to go in there and remediate that.
Mm-hmm.
And that could cost a lot of money.
There was discussion in Pennsylvania, and this was in 2012, 2013, where they were going to go back to landowners on the orphan wells, where if there was a leaking well and it was an environmental hazard and it was on their property, they were going to try to get the landowners to have to P&A that well.
Or the landowners better for sure have the mineral rights if they're going to do that.
Well, but then, it's been passed down through generations, and Joe doesn't have the money to plug this. What happened?
Think about that in the state of Texas. You do that to somebody, they don't have the mineral rights.
Yeah.
Like, how is that even their fault?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, this unique environmental craze, when we look at it, there's some good points to it, but where does that next step go? Right. Does that come back to a landowner? Does that come back to a big company, or does it fall back on, the government itself? Yeah.
No, the landowner cannot be held responsible for property they have leased to an operator. That's in the covenants of the lease agreement.
This is up north with the
this was going back on stuff that they didn't even knew existed, right? And I think it was trying to eliminate some of those potential headaches. But I think
that goes back to Todd was saying earlier, people making decisions not qualified,
yes,
maybe some environmental.
We look at that change. We look at that, and the most oil and gas work that's going to happen in New York now is P&A.
Mm-hmm.
We start breaking out these. California is still California, but we've got a huge state there in New York that's going to be 90% of their work now for the oil and gas industry, and since they can no longer drill and do top holes, even, is going to have to be P&A.
So we got a little bit of time left here. What would you, and I know that you would prefer to stay in the office instead of jumping a truck and haul someplace, right? So what would you want to get across? What is the biggest message to get across to these guys that are doing this?
Just stay safe, like doing P&As in general.
Yeah.
Just stay safe and think about risk and analyze everything that you do, and what could go wrong. Just kind of worry about, what's the worst case scenario that could happen here, and plan for it. Get the equipment out there, get the people out there that you need to handle any type of situation.
Just don't become complacent.
Yeah, complacency is huge. It gives us in well control a lot of work, but yeah. Yeah.
Sponsored by Cudd.
Yeah.
That's right. All right. Well, I guess we can open this up to open questions if anybody has them.
Well, Tony, staying on that subject, data, when all the hurricanes came back through Ida and Rita, Katrina, all that, I was still in the well control business, and we did 534 P&As offshore. And I'll tell you, the key to success is data. You have got to accumulate all the data you can for those set wells, not just from the regulator. You've got to go through drilling info. You got to go through everything you possibly can, because records are crap.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're in the P&A business, records are crap. And the one thing that you have to remember is, when you're P&A stuff, always assume that those plugs are compromised. Full stop. If you go in with that attitude, you're geared up for worst case scenario, and you're not going to get surprised with something. Anything from probably 1990 back, your cement quality, especially in the deeper wells, there's no cement back there anymore. All the cement degradates. That we didn't have the additives that we do today to help stabilization with the gas block and the gas check and things of that nature. And so we get right angle sets in our concrete. But the older wells, I've done several here recently. We went down there to go tag plugs, and there were just no plugs there. Nothing there. 100-foot plugs, 200-foot plugs, 300-foot plugs. There was nothing there.
Disintegrated or
disintegrated, just gone. Yeah.
It's not plate movement or anything like that.
No, just crumbling and falling apart.
Wow.
Well, so, just if you're in the P&A business and you're doing things that you think, well, yeah, there should be something there, just always assume that somehow, some way that plug is compromised.
I like
because
it.
you don't want to get any surprises.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're doing the P&As and you're actually going back in, cleaning out and going back into re-P&A it, cast iron bridge plugs are cheap. They're your best friend. Use them. Them and cement retainers.
Good advice from experience.
Yeah, great info, Todd. Thank you.
Bhavesh, you got any closing comments, buddy?
The only thing I would add is, like John, I think pretty much covered everything. What happens on the P&A side is a lot of times it's an afterthought, especially for operators. If they're spending their money, it's an end of life, end of well life event, and there is nothing that they can get out of it. And it seems to be that a lot of companies, service companies, think that P&A is an easy work, but understanding the risk associated with it, so there are no well control events, is a key.
All right, thanks, brother. Well, if that's everything, we'll call her a day. Thank you guys for joining us. Appreciate it. And we'll see you next time. We would like to thank you for watching. I'd love to give a special thanks to Manny, the producer, and Scotty, the director, for all the hard work they put in. Nobody gets to see. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thank you once again, and we'll see you next time.